All right, guys, this should be fun. I hope that you enjoy it. We're now going to practice being nuclear advocates. Eric is going to run us through some best principles to kind of get us started. And then we're going to show different scenarios up on the screen. You guys will work as groups at your table. If you're by yourself or with one or two, feel free to join, combine with others. You'll submit a response on Slido. And then our professionals up here will provide feedback on those responses. And so we've got 5 different scenarios. We'll see if we hit them all. But Eric, take it away.
All right. So, who in here has heard of the Alara principle? Okay. All right. We haven't heard of this one. Got a new version of it coming up here. And it's kind of an acronym to, guide folks through a productive, persuasive conversation about nuclear power. So the A stands for ask a question, get the conversation going. Without a question, conversations don't usually begin unless maybe you're talking to somebody who already has a very firm opinion about nuclear energy one way or the other, and then who knows if we can move them, right? So the second one, L, does not stand for low, it stands for listen. Listen intently, analyzing, thinking about their concerns. Next, we have acknowledge. I think this is probably the most important part of this. This step, if you miss taking this step, anything else you say will not matter nearly as much. Acknowledging that you heard their concerns, respect it, and them for having it. R is reframe. Stories, metaphors, facts showing why nuclear addresses their concern. And that A is ask a follow-up question. So goes around in a circle, I guess. We'll give a couple examples of this so you know what I'm talking about. So question might be, would you be willing to share with me your concerns about nuclear, or maybe something like, I'm always curious, what people think about when they hear like nuclear engineer. What do you think about nuclear power? Like just like having that genuine curiosity. Listen, you just use your ears. It's regular listening. That'll give you an example. Acknowledge stuff like, I see where you're coming from. We should definitely strive to use power sources that insert thing that they care about. I hear that. I respect your concern. Reframe. Interestingly, this kind of reminds me of putting things in sort of a story format where you can speak to their concern without feeling like you're just correcting them, because it feels very condescending, and people are always looking for reasons not to believe you when they feel like they're being condescended to. It's just how our brains work. And then asking a follow-up question. Of course, this is one piece of a larger puzzle. How do you think that connects with your understanding and integrates with this? Just to give the person an opportunity to keep the conversation going. Otherwise, they might not know what to ask, and the conversation could just die there, and it was a missed opportunity to make some progress. So great. You might ask, how can we get the conversation going? I mentioned this earlier. Oh, what do you do? I'm a nuclear engineer. Oh, interesting. Conversation happens, right? That's because they don't know what to ask yet, right? So just a couple of examples. Yeah, what do you think about when you hear the words nuclear power? It's interesting how people's initial reactions can vary. And you're sort of like opening yourself up to that. How familiar are you with nuclear energy? There's a lot of misinformation out there. I'd be happy to share more about what it is I do if you're interested. A couple of examples. We won't need too much of those for the activity we're going to do in a second, but those are just good ones to keep in your back pocket if you want to have a good conversation with a random person, Uber driver, or whatever. Acknowledging phrases that work. Yeah, I see where you're coming from. Definitely. That's a valid concern. I've heard that before. I really appreciate your perspective on this. You bring up an important point. All these things. I hear what you're saying. All these things that sort of open the door to a interpersonal exchange. Other stuff, this might be some of our reflexes to say stuff like this. Like, well, actually, it seems really innocuous, but it is like very devalidating. Like, oh wow, that person just didn't acknowledge what I just said. It doesn't make any sense. There's a bunch of these. That's kind of a silly thing to worry about when you actually understand what's going on. Like, you're not seeing the bigger picture. yeah, I think you guys get the idea here. Reframing, just a couple examples here. Because you work in this industry, you probably have more anecdotes in your back pocket that you can pull from. And stories are so powerful in making things memorable and persuasive. If people can visualize, okay, this person was talking to this person, there was a spent fuel cask there, this happened. If it's more concrete, people will remember it and be persuaded more easily. So, just a couple this reminds me of the time when I had a similar experience that might shed some light on this. Your point makes me think of a story. Stuff like that can really lead well into reframing the objection that people might have had. So hopefully that was a very crash course. We actually have like a 4-hour over the course of a month training on this with our Atomic Ambassador program that we do, sponsored by NAYGN. So thank you, NAYGN. I don't think any need NAYGN people here, but anyway, we'll get a crash course today. QR code, Christy, take it.
So like I said, we're going to show a couple different scenarios up here. You all will work as a group, submit a response as a group. We will show a couple of the responses up and kind of give some feedback, both positive or delta feedback. And we've got 5 different options. Hopefully we get through them all. So with that, hopefully you all are getting that QR code. And I think we can go to our first question.
We get scorecard.
All right, so this is a Twitter post. I can understand no construction of new nuclear power plants, but it makes no sense to decommission the ones you already have operational when your energy transition is not complete. So this is referring to Germany closing the last nuclear power plant. So go to the next slide. We'll show you an example first of what not to say. So this was really sarcastic. Probably don't say it quite like this. Funny, because I positively can't understand why they don't build new plants. It would be much more modern, safer facilities. So lots of sarcasm in that. That's not quite how we want to start off a Twitter response. So let's go back to the original one. Work as a group. You'll have a couple minutes, submit via Slido, and we'll give you time. If you have questions for our panelists, raise your hand. They can come out, talk with you. But yeah, we'll give you guys a minute or two, and we'll look at your responses. All right, everyone, we've got a couple submissions. If you're still looking on yours, wrap it up here. We've got our first one that says, start by agreeing about keeping the plants we have and ask why they think building new nuclear doesn't make sense. Panelists?
I like the question. Of course, agree with them and then ask why they think building new nuclear doesn't make sense. I think that's great because the more information that you have, the better response we can respond with. And also interacting with people, not only is it to make them curious about nuclear, but also it should be data in your mind, be like, oh, this kind of person thinks this about it. So I think that's a great opener for a more productive conversation. The more you know about how they feel will be better.
Yeah, and you'll know what's their hang up with new nuclear? Is it that it's too expensive, too slow, whatever it might be, and then you'll be able to address that.
All right, we got a second one, and this is more in line with what we're thinking. So don't keep it high level generic. Actually, put in the text that you would actually respond to, say, on Twitter. So I 100% agree that we shouldn't decommission operating plants. I'm curious, though. Tell me more about why you think we shouldn't have new construction.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to open the door, as we mentioned. And I'm seeing a scenario in which this does go down the innovation portion of the discussion. It might be that they don't really know, how would they define new nuclear? I'd be interested to know, what comes to mind when you hear the term new nuclear? And then you can go into a bit more specifics. Maybe there's an opportunity to talk about SMR development, things of that nature. But we have a few more.
Yeah, we'll do one more. Valid point. The startup of a power plant uses the most resources, so why would we decommission a plant before end of life?
It's good. I really like the last one too. I'm curious what you think about what you think the energy transition looks like.
Yeah,
that's a really good open-ended question. That's long. If you're saying that, so we're talking about Twitter, right? But if you are saying this kind of thing in person, the tone of your voice is so important, because it could sound like, oh, well, what do you think it looks like? It feels way different. But if you can ask it as like a genuine, like, I'm curious what this person thinks transition going to look like. That's great. It's a great way to build rapport.
Yeah, I think just to comment on, the startup of a power plant uses the most resources. So why would you decommission it? I think if you're talking to somebody that maybe leans more to the left or likes that environmental climate vibe, sustainability, I think that's a great sentence, because, we've invested all this time, energy, resources into it. Why don't we get its full life out? So I think that's a good point. So I think there's going to be some responses that you'll be able to identify based on the person, right? Like, where do they fall on the spectrum, maybe politically, or on, their favorite energy source.
All right, great job, everyone. That was kind of a tough starter. So we'll go into one that's a little more straightforward with our second question. All right, so we had good examples during the panel. Isn't nuclear dangerous? What about the waste? All right, we've got a couple submissions. So the first, that is a very valid concern, and I could see why you would think that. Have you ever seen what nuclear waste looks like? If not, I'd love to show you some photos.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, you can use my photo or any of the photos we put up there. I think it's good. And I do think what Eric mentioned, the tone of it is like, have you ever seen what it looks like? I think the tone is really going to matter, because it could come off a little snarky, but I've done that. So I like that response.
The energy density of nuclear fuel allows for the waste produced to be the smallest in volume of all energy sources available.
Yeah, I think the only thing that's missing in this one is that just kind of that little piece at the beginning, where you're like, yeah, that's a great question that a lot of people have about the waste. Can even throw in like, like a lot of people like sort of grew up watching The Simpsons. They just sort of assume it's an oil drum with green stuff leaking out the side, right? Yeah, but then and insert the rest of that. And
that one, I thought the same thing before I started. Nuclear, great, that's a story. Waste is the best part, yes. And then why it's captured, stored. I think also maybe saying it's captured, stored. Also to say like this kind of care and treatment of the waste is something that we should strive for in all energy sources. So maybe bringing it back to context. We do a great job with nuclear waste management. So maybe adding something in like that.
And even starting with like, I felt the same thing, brings it back down to, like I also had that concern. It makes it a bit more personal, so it doesn't feel so, what is the word? Snarky? Yeah.
All right, next question. Isn't nuclear bad for the environment? So give it a couple minutes. How would you respond? All right, so first submission, good question. Environmental benefits are the reason I love nuclear power. At our site, the waste is stored and dry cast on site, and the city gets clean energy.
Great validation, environmental benefits. So there's my I think that's good. I think for them, they might be curious, like, okay, it has environmental benefits that might like hook them and reframe it. And I do like the waste and the city gets clean energy. I do think, let's say environmental benefit. Yeah, I think if you leave it for them, and then they'll probably ask a follow-up question like, what do you need it stored on site, blah, blah, blah. And you can also maybe offer up another fact, like nuclear energy has the lowest life cycle emissions of all energy sources. I can show you more.
Yeah, just to add to that one, we might not realize it, but the phrase dry cast is actually very much jargon that won't mean much to people. And I think the word cast actually sort of has a connotation of casket. Seems like death, right? So yeah, just be on the lookout for that kind of terminology. And if you can think of a different way to describe it, like, oh yeah, they're in these like big concrete canisters. Actually test them in the craziest ways. Describe the train crashing in, or when they crashed out. They shot a missile at one, like, just to make sure they drop them on spikes. They lay them on fire just to make sure that nothing leaks, and nothing does. It's wild. And they have like 50 years to make their waste that in size of like on a basketball court, basically. It's incredible. Like, showing a little bit of that passion in there while you kind of connect it to things people can visualize.
One that we hear a lot, what's coming out of that cooling tower isn't that horrible pollution. So, second one from the top here, the clouds coming from the top of the cooling tower may look scary, but it's actually just steam. It's the color of the clouds, nice and pretty.
I like that one.
Yeah, I like bringing it back down to earth. It's just like, oh, you know what steam is. Like you see it. I think it's something that you can then process, so it doesn't, like even cooling tower feels a bit like, what does that mean? So I like that.
So last one, great question. Nuclear is a safe, reliable, carbon-free energy source with very low environmental impact. Fun fact, one nuclear plant can power 1 million homes.
I like that one. And I like that you offered a fun fact. That's something that they can hook on to. I would also, I think with this one too, maybe a follow-up question like, bad can mean so many different things. So maybe doing a follow-up like, what specifically why do you think nuclear is bad? Just a specifying question after your response, because we have various answers of why they think it's bad.
Yeah, maybe a little bit more of a great question. You can add it in there. Like, that's a great question. I mean, it's no wonder a lot of people think that. Chernobyl on HBO, and Netflix just came up with the Meltdown series. Like, I'm glad you brought that up. If your acknowledgement is too short, it can seem kind of trivial or not genuine.
All right, everyone, we are out of time. Thank you so much. Let's give our panelists around here.